Of course, let's start off the conversations right now with human rights lawyer Femi Falana has called on former governors, including Senate President Godswill Akpabio, to stop collecting pensions as ex-governors. He highlighted that the houses of assembly in Kwara, Imo, and Zamfara states have already abolished the governor's pension scheme, following a 2019 court judgment declaring such payments illegal and unconstitutional. Former governors Benga Daniel and Ibrahim Dankwambo have also stopped receiving the pensions. Of course, to shed more light on this, I am joined on the show right now by Olanrewaju Suraj, Chairman, Human and Environmental Development Agenda, joining from the United States, specifically Maryland. And I'm also joined by Jide Ologun, legal practitioner, joining from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
Welcome. Thank you, too.
Let me start with you, Olanrewaju. What is the significance of Femi Falana's appeal to former governors to stop collecting pensions, and how does this actually relate to the rule of law?
Well, I think it is just, for me, it is actually an indictment and also more or less the failure of the law enforcement and the same thing, the judiciary, to actually rise up to expectation in terms of holding accountable some of our public officials, particularly the governors of many of the states. It's always been a challenge getting the judiciary and judicial officer to understand the implication of the recklessness of many of the governors. And that informs why you will have cases instituted in court against some of their atrocities lasting for several years. And at the same time, the law enforcement agencies failing. I mean, just like you will have with most especially and importantly, Code of Conduct Bureau, which is completely comatose in this case, also failing to hold them to account in terms of operating within the ambit of the law. So it does not really need an appeal, and that actually shows the level of frustration in the system. I mean, you don't need to appeal to someone who is already collecting a pension. It will never be allowed in any private establishment for you to have be enjoying retirement benefit in terms of pension, and at the same time earning salary for a new employment contract within the same establishment. But because this is just like a no man's business, it's a national cake, and they can afford to run, roughshod with the system. For someone to have been a governor, and after being a governor, being minister, particularly looking at the Senate president, for instance, and be minister for 4 years, and at the same time now the Senate president, and still collecting that pension. It is from the same federation account, federation allowance that goes, an allocation that goes to the state, that you will have the Senate president drawing from. So it is not from different pools like you would want to be made to understand. And these are actually illegal laws that were passed by them when they were in office. So it wasn't like a law that was actually in existence before they got into office. So the level of brigandage needs to be addressed, and then we need to actually address it holistically.
All right. Now, talking about the cost of governance, right? This has been a conversation on the front burner. I mean, since the assumption of this administration, one of the biggest conversations that has happened is the fact that there is that there's paucity of funds and there's a need to cut spending. And some of the ideas or proposals being put forward is why pay. Let's look at the cost of our governance itself. Aside from those currently in power, there's also the aspect of those that have left office but are still enjoying the largesse of their former offices. Now, I would like to come to you. Of course, you're a lawyer, Mr. Ologun, right now. I want you to look at a barrister, I want you to look at it from the angle of the law this time around. How legal, is this in terms of the provision, in the Constitution?
Thank you very much. Let me start by laying a foundation that the pensions and retirement benefits that retired governors, do I say retired, who have left office collect, they were put in place by the houses of assembly in those states. But having said that, I recall that in the case of Alhaji Garba Umar, versus Taraba State government, the 2016 case, Justice Amadi of the National Industrial Court of Nigeria, declared these pensions collected by former governors as null and void. In fact, in the case of Taraba, that provision was made for the governor and the deputy governor. And I also recall that in 2019, November, Honorable Justice Oluremi Oguntoyinbo, now retired, of the Federal High Court then, declared this same payment as illegal and unconstitutional. In fact, she further ordered the Accountant General of the Federation and the Minister of Justice to go ahead and recover what these former governors have collected. And like Mr. Olanrewaju mentioned, we have a weak system in Nigeria when it comes to enforcement of laws. And talking about the cost of governance, right now we have about 20 former governors who are either senators or ministers. And you can imagine if they all collect pensions from the state they left, and not just the pensions and the gratuity. Some of them have access to beautiful houses in their state of domicile and in the Federal Capital Territory at the expense of the citizens. But remarkably, former Governor Benga Daniel of Ogun State and former Governor Ibrahim Dankwabu, those ones, they have decided not to bother the governors of their states to pay them anymore. I actually listened to Otumba Benga Daniel, and in his own case, he even complained that what he was getting was meager amount and things like that, and a kind of dishonor was coming into it, so he decided to forfeit it. But I can let us know that on the scale of morality, I don't think these former governors are willing to give up these heavy amounts that they collect from their states. But I started by letting us know that the states have legislators. Okay. And it may be that the legislators were settled to pass this into law, because if you look at the economic realities in Nigeria, it may be a case of the rich getting richer and the poor getting more impoverished. It is actually not the best way to go.
I mean, just to give Nigerians a picture of how deep this particular, event right now is eating into the pulse of the nation. Let me just paint a picture of how much an average former governor, earns in some states in Nigeria. Now, under the Acquired Life Pension Law, as amended, a former governor of the state is entitled to an annual pay of about 200 million. That's 2 official vehicles with chauffeurs, furniture allowance of 300% of basic salary replaceable every 4 years, an aide, a cook, a lifetime security guard worth 5 million naira monthly, and 2.5 million for their deputies. That's on one side. Now let's move to Abia State. 100% of the incumbent salary benefits include an official car, police orderly, 2 policemen to secure his house, allowances for cooks, stewards, drivers, and gardeners. In Gombe State, for instance, a former governor is entitled to 300 million naira in executive pension benefits, and also the ex-governor and his deputy are also entitled to 30 days paid travel expenses annually to any country of their choice alongside their wives. And also, a former governor is entitled to 2 utility cars, while his deputy is entitled to 1 car to be replaced periodically. Let me stop there, for Gombe State. Let's move to Sokoto State. 200 million and also 180 million respectively being monetized for their other entitlements, which includes domestic aid, accommodation, vehicles replaceable every 4 years, and the list goes on. Now, my question to you is this. I would also stay with you, Barrister Ologun. How, have the actions taken by some State House of Assembly and specific former governors set some sort of precedent for addressing the issue of, pension, particularly as it affects the purse of the state?
Let me say this because I have an understanding of the political environment in Nigeria. Quite a number of those you find in the Houses of Assembly are also ambitious to become governors. You see, and the Nigerian politics is such that the environment is not empowered. So they have keyed into a particular lifestyle that they must maintain at the expense of the citizens. We are discussing the pensions that former governors collect, and these payments hardly fail. They get it regularly. What about the pensioners who served for years? And the terms available to governors in Nigeria, maximum of 8 years. So you can ask a simple question. How many civil servants within the minimum wage of 30,000 naira bracket, so how long will it take them to earn 300 million as salaries in this economy, in this country? So it's a terrible issue, but you look up to the legislators to help the citizens out. And that is the special feature in a democratic setting. But there are accomplices also, and I tried explaining it, and many of them are also nursing the ambition of becoming governor. So you find a situation where leaders just want to continue to ride on the necks and shoulders of the citizens. But the 1979 public relations Mexican statement states that public relations is the art and social science of monitoring trends and predicting their consequences and recommending what can be done. And now that this issue is on the front burner, if it is sustained, then more awareness will be created. And with the hardship in the country, there may be an uprising, because obviously, if in a situation where the decisions of the courts have not been respected by the executive arm, the legislative arms that are expected to make laws for the benefit of the citizens are looking away from this ugly development. Where do we turn? There are three arms of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And let me say this, if you look at Section 4 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended, it says that the National Assembly, for instance, shall make laws for the peace, orderliness, and good governance of Nigeria. So where do citizens turn to in this apparent injustice that appears to be done to the citizens?
I'd like to go to, of course, Olanrewaju right now. I mean, you are in Maryland, the U.S., and I want to believe that to some extent you're privy to how, the system of government there works. How exactly are ex-public officers treated in terms of pension and welfare? I mean, do we see a scenario of what we are seeing in Nigeria, for instance, happen over there for comparative reasons?
No, it's impossible. Even when you are in office, you can't run with the level of recklessness that you have in Nigeria. If you remember, even when the President Barack Obama was the president of the United States, and he had some guests who were not on official visits to the White House, he had to pay from his own pocket to also take care of some of their refreshment and also entertainment. Traveling abroad, even for holiday, and you have your friends joining on the presidential flight. I mean, not like where you have the children of presidents in Nigeria, even flying the presidential jets to go and watch a polo match or even go for camera festival and the rest of that, using the country's resources and the rest. You can't do that in any of the other sane environments. Even some other African countries, you can actually do that and get away with it. But what, like Mr. Ologun said, the lawmakers are not just potential aspirants to be governors. They are also potential aspirants to the benefit. And that was why you find even state assembly, like Lagos State, for instance, trying to replicate the same thing that was given to the governors, also to the parliamentarians, starting with the speaker and the deputy speaker. And it was the whole opera, as at that time, that stopped the level of that recklessness being extended to the parliament. So many of these laws are not done just because they're looking at the interest of the governor as at the time. And it was not just about the legislators doing it out of free will. It was also because many of these governors have this string and stranglehold on the parliament and can afford to get away with anything through the state houses of assembly. You don't have any form of independence in any of the state house of assembly in Nigeria, and I can make bold to say that, you know, that many of them are in the pockets of the governors, if not the current governor, the godfather of the state. So they can afford to get anything out of the parliament without actually considering the public interest at that. And the way that it is going, I would only pray and look forward to that uprising really coming from the citizens to say enough is enough of the level of recklessness that we've actually seen in terms of the cost of governance.
Well,
it's obvious that citizens are required to actually tighten their belts and sacrifice for the state, but the public officer, starting from the president, in terms of what we're seeing with the presidential yacht, with the presidential vehicles and the first ladies' vehicles, it's obvious that we're not really, we're not expecting from even antecedents that the president will be that of a prudent president, because that was not what is known historically with him, even when he was the governor of Lagos State. There can be effort at generating more money, but there would also be a whole lot of unnecessary expenditure that will be associated with the government, and that is what is already happening in this situation.
All right, now, Barrister Ologun, I would like to go back to you. Now, can you explain the fact that despite the existence of a court judgment declaring the payment of pensions to former governors illegal and unconstitutional, we still see this particular practice continue? And just to follow up to that too, the judge ordered the Accountant General of the Federation and Minister of Justice to recover the life pensions collected by former governors serving as senators and ministers. Now, this was in 2019. We're in 2023. Do you actually see this happening?
It has happened. It's so embarrassing, really. What we learned in secondary school is that you have three arms of government for the purpose of checks and balances, which means you ensure that when there's a decision of the judiciary, if it affects the executive, the legislative arm should also rally around the judiciary to ensure that there is compliance. As we speak now, there was a time that Nnamdi Kanu was ordered to be released by the court, but the executive obeyed. And the lawmakers who are expected to bail the nation out, they appear to have synergized to represent their private ambitions and interests. And that is why, if you have noticed, the migration is so real within them. So it's either you live as governor, you go to the Senate, or you go to the House of Reps, or you live there, you go and become a minister. In fact, recently, the Minister of State for Labor, a former Minister of State for Labor, the senior seal, Keyamo, came out to say that the office of the Minister of State was irrelevant when he was to step out of that office. But shockingly, he accepted another ministerial position. So these are the things you see. I have mentioned the concept of ambition and the fact that it's so juicy within the government circle, and that is the reality. So until we develop the culture of service, Mr. Olanrewaju just mentioned, Obama was two-time president in the United States of America. Obama does not own a property in New York, in Washington, D.C. Some congressmen used to sleep in their offices in Washington, D.C. I don't know if they do that any longer, because they cannot even afford the rent, those apartments. So it's all about service to the citizens. But the reverse is the case.
So what do you think is actually missing here? Is it a culture that maybe because we've gotten used to as a result of being passed down from previous administrations, and then trying to upturn it being a bit difficult? Because we know that Nigeria, many of our laws and offshoots of the military era that maybe has been amended but not scrapped. And we know that many of those laws were designed to sort of favor the people in power then. I mean, what exactly is the root cause of this? Is it that there's no, moral standing in the minds of people anymore? We just, take up public offices with the heart to genuinely serve? Or is it the law, or the country itself enabling them?
There are two sides to this, the side of leadership and the side of followership. If you look at Singapore, for instance, Lee Kuan Yew took over in 1965 when Singapore left Malaysia. And the man, without any force from the citizens, decided to lead Singapore from a little coastal region with little resources to one of the best countries to live and to work in the world right now. Paul Kagame started something similar in Africa, and then John Magufuli started it in Tanzania. That is on the side of leadership. Sheikh Zayed experimented with it in the United Arab Emirates and made a very, excellent result of transformational leadership. That is what we call it. And on the side of followership, some have accused the citizens of this country for being so docile. And I hope that that docility will not be exhausted sooner than expected. Because if you have the profile of about 150 million citizens out of about 220 million estimated citizens that are within the multifaceted poverty bracket, and yet there are no visible attempts to reduce the cost of government in the country, you may expect that someday the citizens may no longer be able to bear the hardship. In fact, it's already reflected. When you look at the rate of crime in Nigeria, you must be disturbed. You must be disturbed.
All right.
So these are issues. So just appealing to the conscience of the executive arm, the legislative arm, and the judiciary also altogether. Because I suggested at the time, let's imagine that the judiciary rolls out a decision and the executive refuses to comply. The legislative arm can shut down the system and say, okay, we are not going to sit, we are not going for any plenary session unless you obey this decision. But when all you just find is that, okay, an accountant general of the federation has embezzled the resources of the country, you invite him to the chambers of the National Assembly to come and explain. In fact, when the present Senate President of Nigeria, Akpabio, was invited to the last Senate to come and explain the funds of NDDC, they were the ones saying off the mic. So you find that there is likely to be a cartel, a synergy to impoverish this nation. And when that is the case, it becomes a very tough war to fight. But I know that Section 15, subsection 5 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999, as amended, stipulates clearly that the state shall abolish corrupt practices and abuse of office. But I don't really know where to position this now, whether it's corruption or abuse of office. But you may permit me to say that if you have a system that does not respect the rule of law, I think that should be the grandfather of corruption.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. And of course, we deeply appreciate your contribution. Olanrewaju Suraj, Chairman, Human and Environmental Development Agenda, joining from the United States, and also Barrister Jide Ologun, legal practitioner, joining from Lagos, Nigeria. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless Nigeria.